thrilled for those that are joining us live and for those who will view the archive of this call. Thank you for taking the time to spend this evening with us. We welcome you to the Apostolic Chamber of Commerce on call. We are attempting to bring attention to some tremendous people and resources within the apostolic movement. You can sense the synergy that is happening, the anointing, knowledge, and experience of various individuals coming together in a very powerful way. And we hope that this will inspire and enable greater effectiveness in the kingdom of God through the use of biblical principles, best business practices, sound financial stewardship, and various resources and experience that we will bring together. We're thrilled to have a very special guest with us this evening, Brother Scott Graham, who is originally from Illinois, a graduate of Gateway College of Evangelism in St. Louis, Missouri. He's married to his wife, Michelle, has two adult children, Jeremy and Jessica. He has quite a resume of experience in the United Pentecostal Church International, serving at various levels and really every level that you can in various capacities. He served as an executive with the General Youth Division for 8 years, now called UPCI Youth Ministries. I was thinking about this, Brother Graham, really in the context of this call. I think it struck me for the first time that my personal interaction with you kind of served as bookends of your time there at the Youth Division. I think it was your very first year serving at the Youth Division that you were a chaperone on a Youth on Mission trip, which is now called Apostolic Youth Corps. There's been a lot of name changes that have taken place in the last couple of decades here, but serving as a chaperone on that Youth on Mission trip to Prague, Czech Republic, and I was an 18-year-old on that trip, a graduate from high school that year. And that was really the first time I had a chance to spend a lot of time with you. And that was a very memorable, life-changing trip for me. And then in your final year serving as an executive with the Youth Division, I was elected Texas Youth President, joined the Youth Committee, and so served the last few months of your term there as Youth President. So it really hadn't occurred to me just in that time frame of those 8 years, going from an 18-year-old attendee on a Youth on Mission trip to being on the Youth Committee, 25-year-old serving as Texas Youth President. But certainly your life and ministry has impacted me directly, and I know so many in our organization. You then served as pastor of the sanctuary for 15 years, and half of those years you were my pastor, and I thank God for that time. And served as Missouri District Superintendent for the years you were pastor, and now, since January of 2019, has served as the General Secretary Treasurer for the United Pentecostal Church. And we are grateful for your service to our organization, the Apostolic Movement, and very thrilled to have you on this call tonight.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. And yeah, the thing that makes you feel really old is when some kid that you took overseas, you look up and he's a member of the Youth Committee and you go, wow.
Yes, sir. Well, before we get into some of our prepared topics for tonight, is there anything you'd want to share just with the variety of experience that you have had in our organization, just something from your time of service that you'd want to share with our audience tonight?
Well, first, let me say thank you for the opportunity to be here and be a part of this very neat concept that the Apostolic Chamber of Commerce is doing. In a larger sense, just the whole idea of the Apostolic Chamber of Commerce, a very excellent idea, something that, I don't know of anything that's even remotely been like it in our ranks. And to have a network of young professionals, business-minded individuals who, are building careers and making their way in the world, as it were, and yet at the same time keep a focus on the world to come and their desire to impact that kingdom. To have that network for folks, just fantastic. It was a great idea, and there's room for that, and it's important. I'm not sure how to even phrase it perhaps correctly, but we laud ministry, and rightly so, honor to those individuals who have a particular call of God to preach the gospel. The Bible has good things to say about them. How beautiful on the mountain are the feet of them that preach good news. That's nothing wrong with that. certainly commanded to give honor and doubly so to those who labor in the doctrine. And I get all that. But there are callings and life purposes that are just as valid, just as spiritually given and directed, that don't put a person in the pulpit. And the church is built around those individuals who have careers and have jobs and are able financially to help carry the gospel with their giving and support of the kingdom. And so this is just so fantastic. And I'm thankful that it's there. And while my path was a little different in what God asked me to do, it's no more or less ordained or directed or chosen than somebody whose career path was a college degree and a master's degree and a career in the corporate world, or an entrepreneur starting a business. If that's where God placed you, that is just as sovereign, and you would be, that individual, if they didn't pursue that, would be as much out of the will as if I would be if I didn't preach the gospel. So I just think this is an excellent way to validate and affirm those whose calling may be a little different than mine or yours, but is still so important. So I'm very, very pro what's going on here, and I'm honored to be a part tonight.
Well, thank you for that. And it means a lot to us, those who serve on this board of the Apostolic Chamber of Commerce, to have the support of our organization, Brother Bernard, and of course your support. And I want to just add here, just a shout out to our director, Brother John Darby, who works tirelessly for this cause, Brother Steve Drury, who has been such a valuable asset to this team and to the rest of our committee members. We certainly appreciate them. So in your current position, you are essentially the chief operating officer of a corporation that brings in annually $50+ million. It is quite an undertaking. From my own experience and a little interaction there in the building, I can say it is a very professional setting. And I don't know if someone who hasn't been to headquarters and hasn't worked in that environment, and even when you walk in the building, I think it communicates this is a professional operation. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And certainly the divisions that operate there, they operate at a very high level, and finances obviously is a huge part of what happens there. So what would you say, besides just the God element, what has prepared you for the position that you're currently in?
Well, that's a fair question. Yeah, I mean, obviously I can't divorce the God factor from it, but laying that aspect aside, my dad was an entrepreneur, business owner, grew up working in his office. He was initially an insurance salesman, salesman. He owned an insurance agency and sold real estate in the little small town we came from. Later in my teen years, he formed a oil and gas exploration company. So I've been around entrepreneurs and that business mindset from even from teen years on. Now, I saw that business from all sides because I cut weeds around tank batteries in the oil field. That was my first job. But I also was privileged. I did something to my computer. I hope I didn't mess anything up. I was also privileged to work in the office and be around that kind of business entrepreneurial mindset. When I went to college, I studied engineering at the University of Illinois before going to Bible school. Not that this would in any fashion totally prepare a man for what I'm doing now, but I had taken a little accounting class in high school, just it was an elective, and really kind of enjoyed it. It was fun to me. I'm a numbers geek and loved math and all that kind of stuff. So when I got to college, I picked up an elective class and just basic accounting, not because I had any purpose to pursue that degree. I just needed to fill an elective, and I thought it sounded like fun. And I know some people that don't like numbers would go, yeah, accounting, fun, sure. But it was to me. So I had that course there. In terms of course, serving the youth division, managed the, what is admittedly a multi-million-dollar operation in the junior youth division. And then, managing local church finances, managing district finances. The principles are much the same. The scale is very different. Yeah. But many of the principles are much the same. So I've had opportunity to grow in some of those positions. I would say where I am now, in fairness, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I'm the COO or CFO, or I'm not sure. We have a gentleman in the building, Brother Bab, who is the chief administrative officer. He runs a lot of the day-to-day operations. And the other thing, in fairness, I have to say, we have a team of accountants. We have three accountants, CPAs on staff who directly manage and do the bookkeeping and the financing and analytical accounting and all those kinds of things. I have learned a ton in the last year. I wouldn't pretend to suggest that when I walked in there on January 1st last year that I know half of what I know now, and I'm hopeful that next year that I'll be able to say that again about this year. But I've had a great team around me. A significant part of what I do is manage the people who manage the finances. Yeah. I certainly am at the chair of the finance committee and meet the budget committee 4 times a year and all those kinds of things. But there's in honesty, I'm not an accountant. I can't begin to pretend that. I'm a manager and manage the people who directly influence the finance. But I reflected back this year on some of those early years and just in Dad's business, watching him budget, watching him plan finances for his business, and then getting to do that at a local church level, a district level. Those lessons have proven to be invaluable in just ramping up to a greater scale in what I'm doing now.
You make such a great point there as far as the management skills, and really that's the people skills when you talk about management and the various areas of ministry, and maybe we could say levels of ministry, whether it was local church, district, and on the North American level. I think each of those levels, they do prepare you for the next and for expanding that scale. And we're in the people business, no matter what you're doing.
Yeah, and it is, I can't pretend it's a major operation. We're it's north of $60 million a year. In fact, this year we're on pace. If we have the next 6 months like we had the first 6, we'll have our first $70 million year. So it's a major enterprise. I don't pretend it's not. And so I'm not suggesting that you can just be flippant and say, well, we got people that handle things. I buried myself. In fact, when I first was elected, I talked to Brother Jones, my predecessor, and I said, do you have any books you recommend that I read? And as humorous as it may sound, he said, when I was elected, the first thing I did is read Accounting for Dummies. And so I literally bought one of those For Dummies books and read the accounting book. I've done some continuing education classes kind of things. It's seminars around town. In fact, I'm going to another one in just a few weeks on interpreting financial reports. And so I'll continue to try to better myself at the skill set associated with what I'm doing. So I want to be better at what I bring to the table, but I also recognize that it's a great deal about just building the people around you and utilizing their skills and forging a relationship with them and managing through them.
The financial numbers that you just briefly mentioned there, that's pretty incredible, because in the course of the past 10 years, those numbers have almost doubled.
Almost, yeah.
That's amazing.
Our net assets, yeah. I mean, it's you only have to go back about, I don't know, 5 years or so. I could have looked those numbers up, but yeah, in terms of net assets, we've almost doubled in just the last 7 years, thereabouts, something like that.
Wow. Incredible.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your career. And I know we don't often use that term, especially those who maybe work full-time for a church or a ministry or work full-time at headquarters. Maybe career isn't really the term we use. We talk about our ministries, but our general audience that we're reaching for are young professionals that are in secular careers, and even ministers that are in a secular career, maybe bivocational. And so give us a little bit of an idea of that. Maybe trajectory would be the word we would use as far as the practical side, because the fact of the matter is that you have to have a career there. You have to have an income to take care of your family, pay the bills. And so that practical business side of things, give us a little idea of what that has looked like as opposed to just the ministry side.
In my life, you're saying?
In your life, yeah.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I attended the University of Illinois and was majoring in computer engineering. And this is back when nobody had PCs or home computers, but that was looming. You could see that on the horizon. And so it seemed like a burgeoning field and looked like opportunities would be wide open in that. And so pursued my degree, had an offer from Hewlett Packard to join a program that they had even while I was still a student, and really had my career kind of, I just thought, laid out in front of me. I had summer internships lined up with Hewlett Packard, and then when I graduated, They were going to offer me, full-time starting job in a management training program that they offered. I mean, I had it all set, I thought. And then, of course, in my world, the call of God to ministry totally rearranged that. And I walked away from a scholarship to college, and I walked away from this program with Hewlett Packard, and I went to Bible school. For me, and I've been one of the very unique and blessed ones, I stepped out of Bible school and went into full-time ministry. I've not been bivocational in ministry. I've been able to be employed by the churches that I've served. Now, I will admit, those early days, I don't think my wife and I really knew how broke we were. I'm glad nobody told us, but we didn't have much and lived on a little. But it didn't seem to matter if we were pursuing God's purpose. I guess what I would offer is that career advancement, desire to advance in kingdom work. What happened? I have no idea what happened.
You're still with us, as far as I can tell.
Have I been here?
Yes, you're still.
Oh, I'm sorry. It totally disappeared off my screen. I had to restart the software. I don't know what happened. But anyway, I apologize. It was not an Enoch moment, I assure you. The thing I think that's important, perhaps, to keep in mind for those who are not, in ministry as in that terms, like I was. Nothing wrong with having a career plan, with having goals about advancing to this position or achieving that goal or that income even, or so forth, as long as that doesn't become what consumes us. Yeah. The single greatest accolade that any one of us can have is not a corner office. It's not our name on a gold-plated sign outside the door. It's one day to hear, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." It really has to be the only and the underlying chief ambition we have. As long as that is what we seeking first His kingdom, then nothing wrong with promotions coming and career advancing and building your business and all those kinds of things. I think the challenge is when we begin to focus on that to the exclusion of what does God want in my life. Because in the same way that I was very quick to affirm that a calling can rest on your life to be an entrepreneur, in the same way it rests on my life to preach the gospel, we also have to be honest enough to admit that a calling can rest on somebody's life to be the janitor of a corporation, in the same way it rests on somebody to be the CEO. And neither is lesser or greater. Jesus really busted our bubble on all that stuff when He said, "You want to know who's greatest? It's the servant. It's the servant." And so if your role in the corporate world becomes very advanced and very prosperous and very great, thank God, be a blessing to the kingdom with the resources that God has entrusted to you. If your role in the corporate world is mid-level management, if your role in the corporate world is, or in the secular business world is I'm whatever role you fill in the blank, it doesn't matter to me. But if you do that faithfully, and you serve your pastor, and you serve your church, and you serve the kingdom, and you're fulfilling what God has ordained for you, then 1 talent, 2 talent, 5 talents is not the question. It's what do you do with where God has placed you. So there's a tension or a balance there. I don't think there's anything wrong with striving for and having ambition and wanting to advance, but I think there also has to be a contentment with wherever God places you. If those advancements don't come, but you're serving God faithfully and you're winning souls where you are, then don't frustrate yourself by comparing yourself with what somebody else accomplishes in the secular world, because every bit of that is going to burn up and fade away one day. In 1,000 years, we're not going to care anyway. It's how do we serve God? How do we serve the kingdom? Wherever He places you. So in terms of career track, I think it's okay to have a plan. I think it's okay to say, I'd hope to do this in 10 years. But if I don't do that in 10 years, I want to be serving God and serving His kingdom in 10 years. That to me is the underlying thing we have to keep in focus.
That's it. Fulfilling the will of God. There's nothing else. There's nothing will ever be satisfying outside of His will. So no matter what the income might be, on that career trajectory. There's a question we were going to talk about a little bit later, but let's tie into this right now. You mentioned that you never really served in that bivocational type role. I think probably the current role that you're in, however, is one maybe aspect of that that people don't really recognize working at headquarters is that you really do have what would essentially be equivalent to a full-time
Yeah.
corporate job.
Yeah.
And yet you're expected to represent the organization, to travel extensively, to minister out. And so you are also essentially an evangelist in a lot of ways on the weekend
Yeah.
while you're serving in this corporate type environment during the week. Now, I would say one thing that I hate hearing people say is part-time ministry, or, I
Yeah.
serve full-time. I don't like that concept. I think we're full-time all the time, Sunday through Saturday, wherever we are. We should be on point when it comes to fulfilling our role in the kingdom, if that's in a corporate environment or a church environment. But talk to us a little bit about those challenges. I think in your current role that there are some who will identify, who are listening in, that they're working in that full-time corporate environment, and yet they're trying to make a full-time kingdom impact at the same time.
Yeah, that's admittedly true. I get, well, I don't know if I'm tickled. I don't know if I'm frustrated. I'm not sure what the right word is when I will catch the innuendo from somebody that, those of us that work at headquarters go in at 10 and leave at 2 and do that 3 days a week, and for that we collect a salary. I was behind my desk at 7:30 this morning. I left at a 5:15. So not that that's any huge sacrifice. Many do that all the time, but that's just the workload is what it is. And yes, there are days away because of travel where I'm expected to represent us in various settings. And then the thing you didn't mention, of course, you've got this full-time role in an office setting. You got a role in trying to be full-time for God's kingdom. And I'm also a husband and a dad, although I don't have kids at home anymore. Sometimes you do feel like you're juggling multiple glass balls, and you don't want any of them to break, and so you're frantically trying to keep them all in the air. I would offer that at some point you have to make some value judgments about which ball is the most important and which is the least. And beyond my walk with God, my marriage is first, and my family has to have that priority. And so if I'm going to drop one, I'll drop one of the others. So there's that third component, which I know is very key to you, but you didn't specifically reference. The tension of balancing those things has to do a lot with scheduling and priorities and all those kinds of things that are important. But I guess the thing I would offer is this. There's a danger, I think, somewhat in having a mindset that those are completely compartmentalized. This is my secular job. This is my ministry time. Our lives, we don't get the luxury of being segmented like that or compartmentalized in our life. I am an ambassador for Christ wherever I am. That's true when I'm behind my desk at the office. That's true when I'm teaching Sunday school at church. That's true when I'm teaching a home Bible study to somebody down the street. I am an ambassador for Christ at all those times. So I'm not sure the right perhaps perspective on it is to figure out how do I balance those different roles as much as how do I keep in mind those are always merged. I never get away from ministry, and I don't mean that as a preacher. I never get away from ministry. My job is to minister to the people I work with. My job is to minister to my boss. My job is to minister to my subordinates. My job is to minister to my peers. My job is to carry the gospel of Christ with me all the time. So I'm not sure it's fair to compartmentalize that too much and think, well, I've got this secular part of me. I've got this spiritual part of me. No, you have me. You have you. You're an integrated person. You're a spiritual being first. And so, man, on your job, don't view that as something you do until you can get to ministry opportunities. View that as another ministry opportunity God has given you. There are people around you. In fact, I would offer this. I really believe that in some cases, the reason that one person stays in that mid-level position and somebody else advances is because God knows there are people around that mid-level person that they can reach with his gospel that nobody else can reach. And he keeps them there because he has ministry intentions for them with people around them. And while our flesh might want to advance, God's saying, whoa, there's somebody right there that I still see you teaching a Bible study to them and baptizing them. And so he keeps us where we are. I will say this, I've used this phrase many times. God is much more interested in my being holy than he is with me being happy. He doesn't, I
Absolutely.
don't, he doesn't exist for my pleasure. I exist for his. He doesn't weave the affairs of life together in a fashion to try to make me happy. He positions me in a way to serve his kingdom best. And so where you are in whatever role, don't view ministry as well, I do that when I get off my job. I think we've got to be more integrated than that. In the same way that your mind probably chews on corporate things when you're away from the office, let your mind chew on church things when you're in the office. We need to be integrated in that regard.
Absolutely. And that's really, I think, the driving message that we're trying to communicate to young professionals and to those that are part of the Apostolic Chamber of Commerce, that your secular work is not separate from your kingdom work. It is all the same. Wherever you are in that corporate environment, you have been positioned by the King of the spiritual kingdom that we are part of. And so it's a powerful concept. I believe if we can get a hold of that, then we can activate a whole generation of young professionals within the apostolic movement to really be a force for the kingdom of God in those environments.
Yeah, I mean, let's think about these things. Let's. So here I'm playing secretary and playing with numbers. But let's think through this a minute. For someone to say, man, if God would give me this promotion, and I'd be making $50,000 more per year, I could pay $5,000 more in tithe per year. Okay, man, look how I could bless my church and God give me this promotion. Admittedly, and I, for your sake and for the kingdom's sake, I hope that happens. But somebody who stays in that same role and wins 5 of their coworkers to God, and they get discipled and start paying tithes, blessing their church financially, much more than you could do with that promotion. And so I just think sometimes we look at our own comfort. I could have a bigger house. I could have, sure, and I pray God blesses you with stuff like, whatever. But just where you are, in whatever role you're filling right now, be an ambassador for Christ. You can be a great blessing to the kingdom, not just by your own giving or your own skills or your own advancement, but in the people that you disciple right where you are. You can be a huge blessing to your pastor. Think about this. The greatest soul winner that your church has ever seen may work in the next office cubicle.
Yeah.
You just have to win that person. The greatest prayer warrior that has ever darkened the door of your church's prayer room may be the individual that delivers your mail every day or whatever in the office, I'm saying. And God has you strategically positioned to impact that person. What an impact you'd make on the kingdom by the people that you replicate yourself in, by the people that you disciple. So just look at that opportunity God has afforded you. I mean, either we believe God orders our steps or not. If he has, and we believe that, accept that, that's a scriptural truth, then you're positioned uniquely in a spot that God says you can do something great to advance his kingdom right where you are. And thank God you're there, because there are people, I don't have the greatest chance of reaching that guy in the next cubicle like you do. And so, you're key, you're valuable, you're vital to your pastor and to your church. And so I want to kind of affirm and magnify that role you're in. And you can do something so great for God right where you are.
You mentioned discipleship several times, and there's been a renewed focus on discipleship here in the past few years, which I think is so key. And Brother Stan Gleason, his book Follow to Lead, I think has really in some ways changed the conversation when it comes to evangelism, that I think we had maybe had the silo effect with evangelism, discipleship, and separated those into a ministry of the church instead of being the same process that evangelism happens through discipleship. And it's so key, I believe, to activating every member on our pews to be engaged in the kingdom. This isn't a topic we had really discussed as part of our call tonight, but do you want to just elaborate on that a little bit from your perspective in the organization and what you see as this discipleship movement, or how we can integrate that with our young professionals and those that are in the corporate workforce?
Yeah, well, there's no question for those who are engaged in the United Pentecostal Church. This is a term that we didn't used to hear much about it. Well, let me change that. We heard about it in terms of a class that was taught on Sunday morning church.
How was it?
Yeah, it was a discipleship class, and we'll get them prayed through in the altar, and then some hired gun will disciple them once a week for an hour on Sunday morning. This principle, and you're right, Brother Gleason's book and his passion for that and his high profile among us has elevated that topic so richly. But discipleship is relational. You don't disciple someone you don't have a relationship with. And so when you look at the opportunity you're afforded in the corporate world, so many people you're connected to, so many people you work with, that you are exposed to and have this ongoing connection with and time with, and you know them, you're uniquely positioned in that regard. As a pastor, when I was pastoring for those years, I could be engaged in discipling people in the church and key leaders and trying to pour myself into them. But week to week, I'm just being as candid as I could be. I had to push to find myself. I had to be intentional to find myself in setting with sinners that I could begin to connect with relationally. And I'm not just talking about the guy that, takes my money at QT when I fill my car up with gas, and I can try to give him a smile and hand him a church card. But that I don't know him. I don't have a relationship with him. Finding those people that I could have a relational connection with to attempt to affect discipleship in them was a challenge. I had to be very intentional about that. Whereas you are afforded a unique opportunity with those that you work with to have ongoing relationship with a significant pool of people, business contacts and associates. You're uniquely positioned for that. So let that be a part of your calling. This thing of building relationships and letting your relationship with that person lead them to a relationship with Christ is our calling. And I would commend that to you. If you haven't read Brother Gleason's book, I would highly recommend that everybody pick up a copy of that and read it and let it really infuse your thinking about what you're doing day to day for Christ.
When it comes to relational discipleship, I see mentoring as a really high level of engagement when it comes to that discipleship process. Maybe this is kind of the end of that process, because we think of mentoring more within the church, within ministry relationships. So talk to us about what role mentoring has played in your life and your ministry.
Well, I mean, there have been probably two significant or most significant individuals in my post-college years that poured themselves into me, both of them uniquely. Well, one was the first man I served coming out of Bible school. His name is Dan Batchelor. He pastors in a little place called Dupo, Illinois. And I served him for 4 years. I was green as grass. I was right out of Bible school. I didn't come out of a ministry home. My dad was not a pastor. I didn't have that to observe or any of those lessons to kind of learn by observing. So this was my first real foray into ministry. And he was so good for me. He was extremely disciplined. He was extremely driven. And I look back, and even though at times, probably living in it, I thought he was pretty hard on me. I look back and I realized so many lessons he poured into me about just excellence in what you do. Excellent. I guess when I think of that season of life, I really reflect on how much he just really drove me to what we do for God should be done with excellence. And professionalism and the best you've got and nothing slack, nothing. He was so good for that. And the second individual was later in ministry. And of course, Brother Enzi, you knew him, and that's Tim Dugas, who was my pastor, preceded me at the church. And then we worked in tandem, and then later in his retirement years, and then ultimately the illness that took him home. But just from him, it was more the people skills, the caring for people, the ability to take large projects and rally people to them to get them done. Those lessons were just huge for me. And of course, I worked with those people. But here's what I saw in Brother Dugas that was so key. I watched him. Yes, I was his assistant initially, and then his co-pastor with him. So it was natural that he would do that with me. But I watched him be so intentional about reaching out to other young ministers, other individuals, and just creating opportunities to pour into them and to listen to them, to care for them. I just saw him be so intentional about that. And I cannot hold a candle to him in that area yet, but I'm trying to be very intentional. I'm 55 years old, and that's not old by any means, but I know I've got more sunsets behind me than I've got in front of me in all likelihood. And I'm trying to be very, very intentional now about connecting with some young men. In my case, of course, it's largely young preachers. In the role I'm in now, in my position in the UPCI, it's largely young preachers that I'm trying to be very intentional about connecting with, caring for, listening to their hurts, pouring into them. But I do kind of wish that I hadn't waited till I was 50 to really be intentional about doing that. And I would encourage each of you at this juncture, you can do that. No matter, I don't know who the people I'm talking to here, and you may be, 28 years old, but there's a 12-year-old in your church that you could pour yourself into, or a 12-year-old in your neighborhood that you could invest in that doesn't have a dad, and you could fill a key role in his life or whatever. I'm just saying there are those around you that you can invest in. And from your, again, I don't know my audience exactly in terms of demographics, how old you are or so forth, but your business experience, pouring yourself into other key leaders in your corporate structure and investing what you've learned into one another here. I mean, think about that. I'm sure there's a great diversity probably. I know it's for young leaders, but there's going to be diversity in here about successes and things you've done. What a resource. Pour yourself into one another. But through it all, let's lead people to Christ. Let's not get so just interconnected that we don't look for those opportunities beyond our walls too. But I've learned so much. The old story, right? There's two ways to learn a stove is hot. You can either touch it or you can talk to somebody that has. You learn it's hot either way, but one way you get scarred. And so I've avoided some hot stoves by the lessons I've learned from those that have poured into me. And I've got some scars where I didn't listen, but I now want to begin to pass those kind of things on to others, and it should be a part of all of us what we do for Him.
Something that I've used here in my local church lately, and we've been on this discipleship focus ourselves, is just intentional relational investment.
Yeah.
That's discipleship, it's mentorship, and it's not even necessarily having to go out and create a whole lot of new relationships to invest in. It's just being intentional with the relationships that we have. God opens those doors, and being very intentional in that relational investment. And when you think about each of us individually, we only have a certain capacity to learn. We have 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week. You only have so much time to try to find answers and keys within the kingdom for yourself. But every person that you connect with, you're connecting with their entire life experience.
Mm-hmm.
You read a book that maybe it took their entire life for them to formulate this concept that they put into a couple of hundred pages. And you read that book in a couple of hours, and you've increased your capacity by the lifetime of somebody else's experience.
You're absolutely right.
That's the power of those intentional relationships. Let's talk about the young professional who maybe they've experienced and enjoyed some measure of success in the corporate world, but they walk into their church and maybe they don't feel like they get the same respect at church that they do on the job, or people don't even understand at church what they on the job, and maybe they've been successful in that area, but they're working and serving on a team in the local church, or maybe they're handed a broom and they're cleaning some part of the church. And so talk to us a little bit about maybe just a right perspective for that young professional to have. Maybe they're not the leader in their local church like they are in the corporate setting.
Well, so see, this is where I get ugly. Why should you be? That's my first question. If somebody was like, man, I'm the executive vice president out there. I came here to clean toilets. Yeah. And your point? Now that's my mean answer. My nicer answer is, again, back to that thing about who's greatest. Who's greatest? Jesus was so clear about it. It's the person that serves. He's the greatest in the whole kingdom. I would maintain that anybody who's not willing to do those kinds of things, anybody who would look at any task in God's kingdom and say, that's really beneath me, probably has just invalidated themselves from a certain level of anointing. There's no way to say this without sounding smug or self-aggrandizing or whatever, but you know, when I was pastoring, we built a new building, and it stretched us financially significantly at that time. Significantly. We couldn't afford to have church cleaners. We just couldn't afford it. It wasn't in the budget. That was one of those things we could cut out, and staff could take care of it, or we'd seek volunteers from church that would come and help. But hey, you're looking at a guy, you know, the side of Scott Graham that people don't see. If I go out and preach some camp somewhere, is that on Thursday mornings I was scrubbing toilets, and you know, I didn't begrudge that. What is there exactly that the Savior of the world, who washed people's feet, could ask of me that I would look at and go, no, I don't think so. That's beneath me. I'm not sure how you define that. I don't know. I'm not sure how to use the word sacrifice when I see the cross.
Yeah. I
have a difficult time looking at anything I've done and calling it a sacrifice when I read Philippians chapter 2, you know, who made himself of no reputation and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross, humbled himself. I look at that pattern, and then that passage starts with, now let this mind be in you, which is also in Christ Jesus. It's what he did. You do it. You know, it's so easy to sing that old song, to be like Jesus, to be like him, you know, and until he really asks us to be. I heard somebody say one time, this is such a neat statement to me. I'm not sure I can. I do know who it was. Brother Jerry Holt, who at the time was the Idaho District Superintendent. I heard him preach one time, and he made this statement. He said, "You never really know if you're a servant until somebody treats you like one."
Wow.
That statement has stayed with me. I can cloak myself in I'm a servant. I just want to be a servant. I find out if I meant that the first time somebody treats me like one. And what is my visceral reaction to that? And so, you know, what you are in the corporate world, again, it's not segmented. If you're the executive vice president, you're still a servant. You've got to be, because you can't segment the two. Now, you may be a servant with delegated authority and delegated responsibility, which puts you in a position to direct others, but you still have to approach that with a mindset. I'm a servant. I even serve my subordinates by providing them a safe place to grow and develop. I serve my subordinates by leading them in a fashion with integrity and character that they trust me enough to be able to do their work well. I'm serving them in that. If you carry that perspective about servanthood in everything you do, even your leadership roles, then I don't think it's that difficult to walk into church and have your pastor say to you, you know, what I really need is a parking lot attendant for this Sunday. You say, no problem. I served at the office when I was chairing the monthly staff meeting. I serve here when I help visitors get from their car to the parking lot in the rain this coming Sunday. It is who we are throughout all of our lives. Every day, every aspect of our lives, we're servants to God. And if God asks, you know, again, I keep coming back to this, but my goodness, one day I want really desperately, I want him to look at me and say, well done, thou good and faithful leader. No. Well done, thou good and faithful executive. No. Well done, thou good and faithful servant. That's the only thing he asks of me, is to be faithful, to be a good man, and to be faithful in what he asked me to do. So again, that you can't segment it. I'm a servant. I want to say that again. I'm a servant even when I lead. If I'm leading well, I'm serving those who are following me. I'm serving them by demonstrating integrity. I'm serving them by communicating well. I'm serving them by, you know, setting goals and giving them the latitude to grow and develop and become. I'm serving them there as well. And when I come to church on Sunday, I'm serving there if I'm you know, emptying trash cans. It's really no different.
So good. I don't want to get us too far off topic here, but you're talking about servanthood, and it reminded me, I believe, a lesson that you taught at our church. It would be about 18 years ago on servanthood. And you told a story about painting a door. I think it was a door in the sanctuary. I don't know if you
almost forgotten about
that story.
I'm sorry.
I'm trying to remember the exact context of it, but it was, I think, in that message.
There was a at the first church that I was at out of Bible school, there was like an emergency exit door off the auditorium that opened onto the parking lot. It was just a metal door, and it opened directly from the auditorium out into the parking lot. It was only used for emergencies. Didn't have an alarm on it or anything, but it was one of those doors that hadn't been opened in so long. I'd hate to know if we could actually get out of it if an emergency ever occurred, but it was there for that purpose. Well, it was a metal door frame, metal door, and it was nasty. It was rusty, and it just looked horrible. And I heard, I'm sorry, I didn't hear. I almost messed the story up. I just looked at it and I thought, that has got to be painted. That looks terrible. Well, again, man, we were newlyweds and broke as we could be. I mean, while buying a quart of paint doesn't sound like a huge sacrifice, it's pretty significant then. And I went to the hardware store and used what little discretionary money we had. And I bought a quart of paint. I bought, wire brush, whatever I needed. And I came back and I went into just when nobody asked me to do it. My pastor didn't ask me to do it. Nothing. I just went in on a Saturday on my off day, and I scraped that rascal down, and I got it, sanded, and I painted that door. And man, when I walked into church, I couldn't see anything but that door. There was, I didn't even know if there was a pulpit there, but that door looked good. You hear me? I mean, it looked fine. And so I went to church that next day, and I just knew that everybody would be raving about that door and wanting to know who painted it. And just, what happened. Nobody said a word. Nobody noticed. I just gave up. It was 3 weeks later, after service one night, I was standing next to that door with a gentleman from the church, and he leaned his hand on the door frame, and halfway through our conversation, he jerked like he was snake bit. And he said, "Look at that. Somebody painted that door." It took 3 weeks for one guy to notice, and it was only because he was right beside it. And I just joined right in. Why, you're right. Somebody has painted that door. I never said a word, but it taught me such a valuable lesson. Why are you doing stuff? Are you doing it for people to notice? Because if that's the case, you're going to be disappointed. If you're doing it for a plaque or for a handshake or pat on the back, boy, are you going to be disappointed. In fact, I'm really afraid I sacrificed whatever reward I might have gotten in heaven for painting that door and for sacrificing to do it by spending 3 weeks pouting because nobody patted me on the back. I probably sacrificed. If I'd have just done it and ignored it, someday God would have taken care of that. But it was a tough lesson. It hurt for a little while when it was going on, but it sure taught me something about who are we serving, really.
Absolutely. Who are we serving, and why are we serving? And
why?
It was, why are you doing it, and how are you doing it? And I think that applies so much, whether it's the corporate setting or a ministry or church setting, that maybe in the corporate setting, we can tend to get into that award mentality. I'm trying to take that next step up the ladder and trying to get that next award. And we come into the church setting where Jesus said, "You do it in secret."
Yeah.
It's a very, very different mentality.
But I think if we can carry that mentality that is the right one that the kingdom teaches us,
Yes.
If we can carry that over into the corporate world and not try to posture and position for recognition and let God advance us. The Bible is very clear. Psalms, right? Promotion comes not from the east or the west or the south. Promotion comes from the Lord. And so as much as we think, well, if I impress this person, if I impress that person, I would a lot rather impress God and let God direct my steps. And that's a much better path for advancement than self-serving things.
Absolutely.
And so again, we can't segment that. The right mindset is that one you talk about in the church about not seeking me notice. If we can carry that over, then God will take care of the rest.
And that's the opportunity for that witness to be evident. Yes. That this person, there's something different about them. They're not trying to advance themselves.
That's right.
They're working for a greater cause.
Yeah.
Let's kind of skip ahead here. We got several questions we had discussed looking at tonight, but let's talk about Joseph. Let's just take a biblical example from the life of Joseph. Here is an individual, as best we can tell from his life, he's in a, you could say, corporate setting. He's second in command in Egypt, and he is, for all practical purposes here, he's working in what would be non-church environment at this time. Yet he impacts the world for and on behalf of his own people, the people of God, and certainly the kingdom of God at work at that time. And so maybe give a little insight to us from what can today's apostolic young professional take from the life of Joseph?
Well, there's a couple things that come to mind. Um, Along his pathway, Joseph Joseph didn't have a goal of saving the world or changing the world. Not in the steps along the way. Joseph had the purpose. I'm going to serve Potiphar. I'm going to serve his house well. Joseph had the path, the thing of I'm going to minister to my fellow prisoners. He had the ability to I will serve. Even let me back up. God had given him these dreams. He saw the sun and moon and stars bow down. He saw the sheaves bow down. He knew from that there was going to come some point of elevation in his life. There was going to come some point in which he would advance. He would go beyond where he was. The interesting thing, of course, is that you could look those dreams up and down, and you're not going to find Potiphar's wife falsely accusing him of rape. You're not going to find you're not going to find the butler forgetting his promise to him and leaving him languishing in the prison. You're not going to find his brother selling him into slavery. God didn't show him that aspect of how the dream would unfold. Joseph just had to go through some stuff, but when he went through those times, he just served. The prisoners in the jail, he provided interpretation of their dream. When he's in Potiphar's house, he advanced. He served powerfully and advanced in that place, even and then falsely accused and out of the jail. And then ultimately God catapults him to this very, very high ranking position. But Joseph, I don't know how to say what I've got in my gut here. He didn't get so enraptured with the idea that I'm going to change the world that he couldn't minister to people right where he was. He didn't get so caught up in grandiose ideas and grandiose dreams and grandiose visions that he could not just be his very best wherever God positioned, wherever life positioned, even when it seemed like very unfair circumstances were thrust upon him. He didn't get bitter. He didn't pout because, what, God showed me people are going to bow down to me, and here I am in the prison. He just accepted the circumstances where they were, and he served effectively where he was. I think, your career path, when you get on the other, when you're 75 years old and you're looking back down your career path, there's going to be twists and turns in it and things that there's no way you could have anticipated, you could have envisioned, or that you could see at the time how God was going to weave those things together to produce the you that he wanted. I guess the other thing that I would offer is that as Joseph progressed through this very arduous and up and down journey, he allowed the process to refine him.
Yeah.
We see him go from a very smug, almost arrogant young man, perhaps wanting to flaunt the favoritism that he had from his dad, wanting to, be a little position hungry, sharing with everybody these dreams about how people are going to bow down to him. And life took some of that starch out of him. And then when we see him at the end of this thing, he's weeping over these same brothers that threw him into the pit. Life has a way of knocking some of that out of you. So I would offer that part of what we can learn from Joseph is, as your career, as life leads you through this journey from where you are right now to wherever God ultimately leads you, don't just seek to, your desire should not just be, what more can I do, but how can I be better? What does God want to work in me in terms of character and integrity and servanthood and a Christ-like spirit? Let God develop who you are with at least as much passion, probably more than God developing what you do or what you are. Let the who of who you are. Let Joseph teach you that it's more important you develop that. If you let God break and form and reform the who you are, it becomes much easier for him to position you for what he wants you to do down the line.
So powerful. Such a such a powerful understanding of God's purpose at work. It's interesting that we don't see Joseph referencing his dreams until you get to the end of his life and his brothers are bowing before him.
Mm-hmm.
And it says, then Joseph remembered his dreams.
Yeah.
And you almost wonder, maybe he thought the dreams aren't going to happen. You know, he's not even close to his family. He's far away in another land. And maybe at that point he thought his dreams were dead. And yet he still served with excellence. He still continued wherever he was to do the right thing, to serve with excellence. And I think that's a good lesson in those. It seemed like the dreams were dead, and yet God works through it to bring it all to pass.
Oh yeah, I mean it's an easy human trap to fall into that says if I can't sit on Pharaoh's throne, then I'm not going to bow at God's.
Yeah.
But Joseph had this thing that said, you know what, I'm his, and what he does with me is his call, and my call is to be a man of integrity. Joseph is one of the rare characters in Scripture that we don't really see a sinful moment in.
Yeah.
He doesn't have his David and Bathsheba moment. He doesn't have his Abraham lying about who his wife is moment. He doesn't have a significance. Now, he has some sinful attitudes. Like I said, there's pride and some things early on in his life. But Joseph demonstrates a remarkable characteristic to us of integrity in through the ups and downs of life, and not getting, like I said, yeah, and you referenced it well. He didn't get so wrapped up in this vision that God gave him of what he would do one day, that he let that consume him to the point that God couldn't make him who he needed to be in order to do that one day.
You mentioned that process of becoming. It reminded me of a statement that was attributed to Jim Cymbala, pastor of Brooklyn Tabernacle, very early on in his pastorate of that church. He was praying a prayer one day, and he felt like God rebuked him. He was praying that God would give them a church of 1,000. Mm. God spoke to him and said, if you'll become the kind of person that can pastor 1,000 people, you'll have a church of 1,000.
Yeah.
It's about becoming, and then God will take care of the rest.
Yeah. Promotion comes from him. Promotion comes from him.
Wonderful call, and we are so thankful for your time and for your life, your ministry that you've invested in the kingdom, and then sharing that with us tonight. Is there anything just in parting that you would like to express to those that are part of the call tonight?
Well, again, I thank you for being part of this effort at large, the Apostolic Chamber of Commerce, and thank you for taking time for this. This is a part of spiritual formation. This is a part of God working on us and letting iron sharpen iron. I don't even remotely pretend to have all the answers to this. God's still working on me a lot, but it's an honor to get to spend time with you and do great things for a great God. Just don't get misguided about what defines great things. Great things are not measured you can't measure if you're doing something great for God by your W-2 alone. It has a lot more to do with how many lives you're impacting for Christ. And so that's my admonition to you, I guess, is advance, do great things, have a career plan. That's all cool. But seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Let the other stuff fall into place as God orders.
Awesome. Tremendous advice. And again, we thank you so much for being part of this call. And to everyone who has joined us tonight, thank you for taking the time. At this point, we're going to turn it over to our director of the chamber, Brother John Darby, and he will close things out tonight.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it. So normally about now you'd be hearing from Seth. However, he is a small group leader in his local church, and he offered to bail on their kickoff event tonight. And I said, well, that's kind of the opposite of what the discussion is tonight. And so I appreciate his dedication to the effort as well. I want to add my appreciation both to you, Brother Graham, but also Brother Enzi. It's really easy to see your kingdom impact, conferences that we've been to, or even I can jump on YouTube and see the impact you've had on the kingdom. And it's very obvious that that there's a significant amount of prayer that goes into that opportunity to impact the kingdom, and personal study and things. And I give myself a free pass because while I have, a full-time job, and after work I've got to go get my oil changed or stop by the bank, you work for the church, so you're just sitting around all the time, and you've got all this time in the world to pray and study and read the Bible.
Well, yeah.
When I talk to you guys, it turns out that, while you might have a staff prayer meeting, you struggle just as much as I do to protect that time. And it turns out that your car needs an oil change and you have to stop by the bank. And it turns out that this free pass I've given myself to not impact the kingdom to the level that you do, turns out it's just an excuse. And in fact, for me, my mission field can be the cubicle right next door. For the two of you, for the most part, the people that you work with, they're already discipled. You have to take that extra step to go and find somebody to be able to share the gospel with. And it turns out that just because you work for the church, the Great Commission is still to you. Because I have a successful secular career, the Great Commission is to me too. Turns out we all have that same level of responsibility, and I don't get to give myself that excuse. And so I really appreciate you both taking the time to kind of peel that onion and help us understand that it's important to all of us, and it is about the kingdom. The Apostolic Chamber puts together the young professionals group, which really it's a group of people that are chasing God. And in our pursuit of God, it turns out that as the fruit of the Spirit display in my life, that ends up helping my career. It turns out that as I become more like Jesus, that has benefits beyond just a good spiritual experience. But who doesn't want somebody who has joy in the workplace, joy in their life and whatnot, and who's patient and experiences long suffering and all of those things that just come with the relationship with God. And so the young professionals is designed to encourage us as young. I want to say us. I don't think I get to be a young professional anymore, but it's designed to encourage apostolic young professionals to have a kingdom impact as they're pursuing a career. We're not called to full-time ministry per se, where I'm going to go and hit an evangelistic circuit or possibly pastor a church. But that doesn't in any way release me from the same obligation to impact the kingdom. Because as Brother Graham said, 10,000 years from now, nobody's going to remember that promotion. Nobody's going to remember the employee of the quarter at ABC Corporation. But it's entirely possible that 10,000 years from now, when I'm sitting on my cloud playing a harp, my coworker is sitting there with me. And so, dear Lord, I hope I'm not playing a harp. That would not be heaven for anybody. But yes. I appreciate your time and spending with us tonight. We will make this available on our social media. I'd appreciate it, everybody on the call tonight, if you would tag some friends. This is a very important message that as we pursue careers and things, that's all well and good. That's very biblical, but we also need to impact our kingdom. So thank you. We'll sign off for tonight. Again, thank you, Brother Graham. Thank you, Brother Enzi. You guys have a great evening.
Thank you, sir.